Good morning and thanks for joining me today on this kind of short, sharp 20-minute webinar looking at how Synergist helps agencies manage capacity. Before we start, for those who don't know me, I'm Steve. I'm one of the co-founders here at the Agency Works, and I've been working with agencies for well over 20 years now. And in this session, we're going to tackle a familiar challenge, capacity and resourcing. So if you're constantly juggling team workloads, whether you need to know, you need more projects, more freelancers, or even to make new hires, then you're not alone. So today, we'll explore how Synergist can help you take control of your capacity, utilization, and hopefully use data-led planning instead of guesswork. So we know that most agencies manage resourcing in spreadsheets or maybe in Slack or based on gut feel. People are overbooked, others are underused, work gets rushed, clients feel the pinch, and suddenly you're firefighting instead of focusing on what really matters. But resourcing isn't just an admin task. It's one of the biggest levers that you have for profitability, client satisfaction, and your team well-being. So my goal today is to show you how Synergist helps agencies move from being reactive to proactive planning using powerful tools that gives you total visibility over people, projects, and hopefully profitability. However, so I want to start with looking at a quote, and this is a quote from one of our agency clients that sums up the impact of getting capacity management right using Synergist. So control and clarity are two things agencies often struggle with, especially when you're juggling multiple projects, freelancers, and internal teams. By using Synergist to forecast capacity and monitor utilization, this agency was able to move from being reactive firefighting to much more proactive planning. And it wasn't just about the visibility, they actually improved productivity and billable time across their business. And it's this kind of transformation that we see when agencies start making data-led resourcing decisions rather than relying on gut feel or spreadsheets. But why does capacity planning matter? There's lots of reasons, but I've picked out 6 for the purposes of today's webinar. First one, which I think is really important, need to know how much capacity you have. How many hours you have in your team means that you can forecast the realistic revenue you can achieve with your current team. It also means you know what you have to sell. So for example, how many hours of design time do I have? How many times of copywriting? How many times of dev do I have? And if you're consistently selling more of a specific resource month after month, it's a clear sign you need to recruit. But if it's just a short-term spike, the data tells you it's time to bring in freelancers and not make those longer-term commitments. You can also use the insight to smooth out demand. So if it's just a temporary peak, you might be able to bring work forward or delay it slightly, reducing the reliance on freelancers altogether. On the flip side, you can quickly spot where you've got excessive capacity and where you need to drive more sales for that specific resource type. But ultimately, this means taking on projects when you're properly resourced, not over-promising or scrambling. You deliver on time, you keep your team balanced, and you keep, hopefully, your clients happy. Now, before we dive into the demo, for some of you who don't know, who haven't perhaps attended these sessions before, don't know anything about Synergist, it is the #1 agency management software trusted by over 500 agencies across the UK. Since 2003, we've been dedicated to creating a platform specifically dedicated to designed for agencies like yours. It's highly customizable, making it a perfect fit whether you're a creative, digital, marketing, PR agency, or any other professional service business. So why do those 500 plus agencies choose Synergist? Typically, and this might be true for some of you, agencies often find themselves juggling multiple systems, whether that be spreadsheets for budgets, separate tools for briefs, sales pipelines, resourcing, project tracking. It's all very time-consuming, disjointed, and it makes it hard to get a clear view of what's really going on across your agency. So hopefully that's where Synergist comes in. It replaces all those disparate systems and brings everything together in one place, from the initial brief and sales opportunity right through to project delivery and invoicing, giving you hopefully a seamless, joined-up workflow. It's not just about saving time, it's about creating transparency, boosting efficiency and profitability. Okay, that's the sales pitch over. So let's now jump into Synergist and take a look at how it works in practice. And I'll walk you through 4 key areas: looking at capacity planning, real-time visibility, utilization optimization, and then using data-driven decision-making tools. Okay, so to do that, I'm just going to need to switch screens. So just double check that you're seeing. Yep, should be fine. Okay, and I'm also going to turn my camera off. You don't want to look at me. Okay, right. So before we jump into looking at capacity, let's touch on something which I think is really critical that underpins everything we're going to look at today, and that's estimating the true number of hours required to deliver the brief. Getting this right is essential for 2 reasons. One, it protects your team from unrealistic expectations and hopefully burnout. It also protects your margins by ensuring that you're forecasting based on what it'll actually take to deliver the work. So in the example you can see on my screen, I've created this demo dummy job creative strategy, and I've broken my job down into 3 components. We call these phases. So creative conceptualization, project direction, content direction. And what the system allows me to do is estimate how much time I think of each of these different resource types that we will need to deliver each part of the job. So not only will that drive my recommended charge, because we have your rate cards, agency or client rate cards in the background. So by estimating, I can see that the system recommends this should be around 27 grand. For the purposes of this demo, what I'm looking at is actually how many hours we've estimated, because that's what's going to drive my capacity forecasting. That might be completely different to what you commercially quote your client. So we separate out estimates and quotes, and we do it for a reason. We work with lots of agencies who often will reverse calculate the estimate from the budget or the quote. So for example, if we in this instance don't think we can charge 27 grand, what we often found was agencies would start to reduce the number of hours. Not only does that put more pressure on your team because they're not being given the right amount of time to deliver the project, but it also screws up your capacity forecasting because we want to know the reality. If we think it's going to take 196 hours, that's what we should be forecasting in our capacity, not amending that. If we have to make commercial decisions, then we can do that in the quote. That also is really useful as well, because even before we get to resourcing, which we'll look at in a second, if you use the system to manage timelines or even just have dates on the phases or use a Gantt chart, then straight away, those 196 hours that we've estimated can be reported and spread loaded over the dates. So we know full well from the 25th of May to the 5th of August, that's when we think that time will be required. The same is true for each individual part of the job. So those 156 hours in phase 1 can also be scheduled. So it's a really useful tool if you're not resourcing straight away, because perhaps it might be a job you're doing in the future where we can look at capacity and requirements for kind of later months. Okay. It's also particularly useful when we start looking at forecasting. And I think it all really starts with your pipeline. So to plan effectively, you need to consider the impact of new business. So for example, if we were to land 3 pitches this month, what would that do to your team's availability? So in the view we're looking at now, this is one of my pipeline views, and I can view it by description of job. I can see the pipeline, I can see expected close dates, and obviously I can see the value of the opportunities included too. But what's really, I think, useful is looking at also, I've asked the system to return me estimated hours, because you can choose which columns you include in this report. And what I'd be interested in looking at is, of the jobs that we're very confident on, so perhaps all jobs that are at 75% and above, if they were to land, how many hours would they each require? So we can start looking a little bit further down the stream, not waiting for jobs to land and then kind of panicking about how to resource them and whether we have capacity. I'm reporting this much further. So it's a really useful tool for looking at kind of future capacity based on pipeline. We can also see this sort of information as well in one of our many dashboards. So the sales dashboards, as it suggests, will be showing me that information, so that pipeline view can be viewed in a chart format. But for the sake of this webinar, I'm more interested in this part here, which is looking at hours sold. So when we speak to agencies about trying to hit certain utilization targets, one of the key concepts for me is, have you sold enough hours? Because if you haven't sold enough time or sold enough hours in the business, the chances of your team hitting those utilization targets are slim. So what this is showing me here, in this period, how many hours have we sold against how many target chargeable hours have we got? And I'll come back to that in a second in terms of what that means. I can also look at that, though, based on individual resource types. So here, for example, I can look and say, well, here I can clearly see in terms of what we have available in this period for creative director against what we've sold, then we've sold more than we have available. That is different perhaps to your senior developer where we have some capacity. So again, using this data, this insight to drive commercial decisions, because we may go back to our pipeline, and if we have some dev jobs in there, then again, we may make commercial decisions because we have capacity in that team in that period to deliver those projects. Right, now let's look at how we manage the day-to-day resourcing of that. So in resource bookings, this is this is where we can see, should I say, who's overbooked, who's underbooked, or just right. And if we need to move things around, we can drag and drop bookings. But the key is it's all in real time, so there's no more jumping between spreadsheets and schedules. And also, if someone's off sick, on holiday, or if deadlines shift, then again, it's easy to adjust without breaking everything else. But this view stays live so that you're always making decisions with up-to-date data. So as you can see on my screen, we have a split screen going on. So the bottom half of the screen is a list of all my job estimates. And I can filter this by client, by team, by job, whatever you want to look at. But the important thing is it's showing me estimated, booked, so what's booked in the calendar, and therefore it's remaining. So I think the key to successful scheduling is understanding how much time you have to schedule. There's no point giving somebody a piece of work to work on and letting them work as long as they want. There needs to be some framework to it. There needs to be some concept of how many hours we've sold to do that piece of work. So hopefully that will help kind of manage profitability. So here, for example, we've got 24 hours estimated. We've booked 8, we've got 16. So I could just pull that in and drop that into somebody's diary. Okay, so here I can hover over the booking and I can see what each member of the team is allocated to. The colors can represent different things, so you can play around with what that means to your agency. And you'll notice we have some kind of stripy bookings as well. That's where the system allows me to book what we call draft or tentative bookings, which allows you to kind of reserve people for future events, whether it be kind of internal meetings or pitches. The top half of the screen is where I can filter my teams. So in my demo system, I have 3 teams with people allocated to different teams. I could filter the top half of the screen just to look at one individual, 2 individuals, or one team in isolation. And then each of those team members can see what they've been booked on. I can also change the view as well to look at this. So I'm looking at this for 1 week, but I can change to look at today. So you can look at much more granular from a, if you're booking kind of 15 half an hour slots. I can look at it monthly, or we could change the duration to look at over a period of time. So that's really useful for looking at what people are working on, what the individual bookings are. But for the purpose of today, what I'm probably more interested in is this view here, which is what we call a loading view. So that then switches the data from being bookings to a collective view of capacity. So this works in a simple traffic light scenario where we've got green for availability, amber means somebody's fully booked, and red means there's more work booked, that there are hours in that period. Now, this is where I mentioned before, target chargeable hours. What the system allows me to do is set up different chargeable utilization targets per individual. So for example, Jay, being an account exec, may move from being green to being amber when he has, I'd say, 6 hours booked, because that's the utilization rate we've set on Jay. Whereas me, being an account director, may move to be amber and fully booked when I'm at 3.5, 4 hours, because I get more involved in SLT, running the business, pitches. So again, it's a really useful tool to be able to set individual utilization rates per person. Now, once we've done that, we can now look at, individuals can now look at that in their own calendar. So this is a really useful tool when it comes to managing their own capacity. It gives each user a clear visual overview of their workload, including the scheduled tasks that we've looked at, maybe internal meetings, book time, non-chargeable allocations like holiday or internal work. But importantly, it also links directly to each person's timesheet, making it quicker and easier to record time accurately. So this means that you're more likely to complete their timesheets consistently and with more precision because they're not starting from scratch, which will ultimately give you better data when we start to look at those utilization reports in a second. So here we can see each of those bookings coming through. If I clicked on the booking that I have for today, it appears in the right-hand panel. And I've got a very quick, easy stop-start timer to record my time against, or as I said, we can just simply click on a button and it auto creates my timesheet, filling in all the details for me. They can add more narrative, they can change how many hours. And a nice feature as well, this idea of a feedback loop, particularly useful for agencies who are working remotely these days. It allows an individual or team member to feed back to either the traffic manager or the job manager to warn them that perhaps more time is required or a project stalled, because that will have an impact on future capacity if things have to move. Okay. Right, okay, so we've looked at some of the tools for getting data into the system to look at capacity and manage it, but how do we view it more holistically? For that, I'm going to move back into our dashboards, and one of the ones that we want to look at, as you'd imagine for a capacity webinar, is our capacity dashboard. So this is helping you understand whether you've got headroom to take on new work or if you're heading towards a bottleneck, and you can forecast weeks or months ahead, essential for hiring, freelance planning, or deciding whether to pitch or not. So all of the data that we had in our resource bookings tool is now presented in the dashboard. So I've asked the system, again, you have date range choices. I'm looking at 5 days for next week, and it's showing me Monday, how much time is available, how much time is booked. And I can see in the yellow, we've also got people who are off or on holiday next week as well, so that will reduce capacity. I can also see this line here, which aggregates the estimated hours over that over that week. And I can also see if we're tracking against our target chargeable hours. That is all summarized as well down here. So I can see for next week, we have 648 hours required to book, of which we booked 306, which is 47%. We then take away the 3 days holiday, which gives us a total available amount of time. I can also see that collectively per team, so I can see the percentage booked per team, and also drop each team down to look at how that's impacted per team member. So again, really useful tool, just giving you the data to make those kind of hiring decisions. And again, you can look at this based on what's been confirmed or also what's in your pipeline too. Next thing we want to look at is our performance dashboard. So this is where you can start to understand where your team's time is being used and where it might be going to waste. So we talked about setting utilization targets and tracking actuals. Excuse me. But this helps you spot where the gaps are, who's consistently under their utilization target, and where you may be leaving money on the table. It's not about micromanaging, it's just about making smarter, more informed decisions. So here we can see I'm tracking our utilization against chargeable target as a percentage. We can look at it based on the hours against target, and then also against the value. So it's converting those hours into a value as well. Finally, we've just got a general summary of resource utilization, which can show me how many hours are required, total hours, chargeable target, chargeable hours, and non-chargeable hours. So again, it helps you track against those targets. And in the top right-hand corner, you can see up here, you can filter this view for the whole agency, or you can do it for individual teams too. Finally, I want to show you the data analytics tool. So this, I think, is one of the most powerful areas in the system when it comes to reporting and insights. So this dashboard pulls together real-time data across the system, allowing you to build bespoke reports that reflect exactly what you want to see as your role or what the agency needs to see in general. When it comes to capacity planning, it becomes really useful because you can create custom reports that show you things like capacity versus demand across teams, departments, individuals, forecasted versus actual utilization over a period of time, maybe available hours by role or skill set, and even future pinch points based on what we looked at that was in our pipeline or even confirmed work. So you're not limited to static views. The filters and dimensions in the dashboard mean that you can drill down into any part of your data. You can also save these reports and have them on your own personal dashboards, or they can be scheduled and shared with the relevant stakeholders, or simply just used as part of a weekly resourcing or commercial meeting. So it turns what was once a manual, time-consuming spreadsheet task into something live, visual, and easy to act on, hopefully giving you more confidence to plan ahead, not just react. So in my example, you can see I have a number of different reports created. They don't need to be capacity forecasted or availability. They could be more finance-based if that was your role. So I could look at things like profitability or fee forecasting. But in my example, I have confirmed capacity by month. So I'm looking in the current period and then future months. And I can show that visually as well, if you choose to. Or I may be looking at the same sort of report, but including remaining. So in this current period, what's available, what have we estimated to show me remaining, and likewise for future months. So we can start to see where we might have potential issues, either by team or by resource type, depending on what you're looking at. So to recap, Synergist hopefully helps you with that kind of forecasting resource needs and confidence, spotting and solving resource issues before they hurt, improving utilization without burnout, and then backing up your decisions with kind of real data that's in your system. Okay, so that brings me to the end of today's short, sharp session. We've hit the 20-odd minute-ish. Thank you very much for joining me. If you'd like to kind of delve a bit deeper and take the next step, we were much more happy to explore this and how it could work for your agency. If you do have any questions, let me know. You can also reach out to us on LinkedIn and also check out any of our upcoming webinars. There's an agency webinar, agency masters webinar I'm doing next week on client relationships and managing clients. There's also access to a lot of previous webinars that we've done across the team on our YouTube channel. And for plenty more insights, then just visit the Agency Works website and you can access them there. Thanks once again for joining me. Hopefully it was useful, and hopefully you can join me on the next session.